comment, particularly as it affects the budget ritual in Nigeria. It is very important we understand the need to depart from this ritual because it is not serving the interests of our people at all. Now, what is this ritual? We present budget year in, year out, but we do not stick to disciplinary measures that are expected to make a budget effective. This is because we tend to speak from both sides of our mouth. It has become a ritual because you do it because the public expect that you lay a budget. And you have laid it, it is a tradition. So whatever comes out of it is no problem. I'm saying this, Mr. President, because since our commencement of democratic rule in 1999, you can point out which year, since then up to this moment, we're discussing this budget. You can point out which year, maybe one or not more than two, where budget implementation reaches the peak of 70% or 75%. And this is becoming very worrisome. Now, we are discussing the 2020 budget estimate. Is it fair to say that we had a budget in 2019 that is likely not going to be implemented? Because as at this time we are talking now, nothing had been done on the 2019 Appropriation Act, and we are discussing 2020. So we refuse to address this aspect of our shortcoming because we are looking up to what will happen in 2020. And no nation moves forward without defining what happened in the past. And you use the present to chart the future course. So I want to advise that let us ensure that we depart or effect a radical departure from this ritual, this budget ritual that we are used to. Anytime we lay budget and we go ahead and do whatever we want. In fact, some of the projects that are being implemented are not even in the budget. But yet, as Parliament, we do not care to follow up and ask questions, probably for reasons that are very, very disturbing. I want also to make comment about our lack of consistency in policy statement that we make in the public. We have made this diversification song like a national anthem. Our economy, we need to diversify our economy. Public office holders, that is what they say. You will see ministers speaking like that. Even some of us in the parliament, we say we need to diversify our economy because we are operating a mono economy. We say all this, but in presenting the budget estimate, we do not reflect this thinking. We do not. Look at, for instance, the allocation we have in the agri sector. It does not really portray a nation that is prepared to diversify. No. We are only prepared to speak from both sides of our mouth. We need to learn to walk the talk if we really want to achieve a significant growth in our economy. So this is quite a very worrisome development in our budget system, and it's still subsisting. It will not die except we act very seriously. This is because we do not take budgeting as a serious business. We can never achieve. We know that it might be difficult to achieve 100% implementation, yes, but let there be a significant improvement in the level of implementation. Once we go on this, oversight also becomes like a ritual also. It's a process. You have gone and come back, reported, and nothing happens. After all, it is the normal business. So I think we must have to move from this ritual and do something that will give us results. Something that will be seen working, a workable solution. So having said this, Mr. President, I want to add that we need also to improve the allocation on security sectors of the economy. Although there has been debate in the public domain on whether the security apparatus as we have, or as it is now, are serious about achieving results or taking us somewhere. I'm saying this without recourse to the dear lives of our security men that has been paid or is being lost in the war front. But I want to add that our security officials need to work harder because there has been accusations and counter-accusations. We have instances of criminal doings that mostly are being promoted by security operatives. And it is widely believed that because they think they are not remunerated well, they connive with criminals and advance criminality in the society. And sometimes also they allow the prevalence of these security challenges to go on because they reap from it. If it dies down, there will be no much allocation for it. So there must be a renewed patriotism, a renewed zeal towards the project Nigeria. Otherwise, you hardly find people who will be willing really to lay their lives for the country that we are serving. This matter is everywhere.
Chief Whip, please, how far are you? Because I'm monitoring, it's supposed to be your job. Please.
Thank you for the protection. Okay. So I want to add my voice to those who have spoken that we need to work harder to have a budget that will work, a workable budget. Thank you, Mr. President.
President, distinguished senators, I'm Dr. Surajuddin Ajibola Bashiru. I represent the people of Osun Central Senatorial District. First and foremost, I think it's good that we are debating, this budget at this time. And to start with, the 2019 budget that was referred to as not possibly been implemented, would not have been implemented if budget is being passed at the close of a session of the National Assembly. Be that as it may, what struck me looking at the budget is that the country, contrary to the widespread impression that we have, is really a very poor country. And that if we are still thinking in a conventional way, we may not really be on the path of development. And I say this because looking at the budget itself and traditionally our budget in Nigeria, there appear to be asymmetric relationship between revenue generation and expenditure in the budget. This clearly was stated in paragraph 21 of the budget speech by Mr. President, where it was highlighted that about 70% of budget deficit under the 2019 budget, and even under this particular budget, it's already been highlighted that 2.18 trillion naira will be the deficit under the budget. A lot of people out there will be talking of what was allocated to health, what has been allocated to education, what has been allocated to infrastructure. The question is that there is a difference between allocating money as head of expenditure and having the necessary revenue to be able to back up such issue. So I would rather say that as going forward, we must begin to think, how do we diversify revenue base of our society? When we talk about 256 billion being allocated to works, I have it on good authority that what is even required to take care of outstanding in the Ministry of Works and Housing is in excess of 500 billion naira. And here we have allocated 256 billion. I will be said to be huge comparative to what has been allocated to other sectors. So I would say, one, there's a need for us to think outside the box in terms of how do we generate revenue for our country. One good step that has been taken in the budget in this regard is the increment of the percentage for VAT. And the good thing about this is that it is done having in mind the need for us to be able to think in the way of progressive taxation. When we look at the way the finance bill that is being sent as a couch from the speech of Mr. President, the vulnerable people, the poor people in the society are being insulated from the effects of the increment of the VAT. Let the rich, the affluent who can pay, let them pay for the development of our society. People say we go to other countries, they say everything go and run very well. It runs very well because everybody in that society, particularly the rich and the affluent, they pay for development of our society. In Nigeria, we must make our rich people to also pay for the development of our people. In the area of sectoral intervention, I want to commend the allocation to the power sector of 125 billion naira. But beyond the allocation, we must look at the legal and commercial constraints to ensure that it's effective transmission and distribution of electricity in Nigeria. We cannot talk about diversification of our economy when we run on less than 3-hour electricity in Nigeria. No meaningful economic development can occur. There cannot be diversification of our economy unless we take the issue of power, the issue of energy very seriously. So I want to enjoin us as we are considering this budget to also look at the legal and commercial constraints and re-examine what has been done and if it is possible undo what has been done in terms of ensuring that we have power, uninterrupted electricity in our country in no time. Without this, we cannot have any meaningful development. Thank you.
Good people of Cross River Central. Mr. President, let me begin with commendation. From what we said our feet here, you made it very clear that there was need for us to treat the budget matter expeditiously. You spoke about it, you were firm about it, you acted so, and I'm happy that the presidency responded accordingly, and today we are dealing with the budget and we are optimistic that by December we should be done with it for the general good of the generality of our people. Mr. President, the issue of VAT has been spoken to by a lot of our colleagues, but I think this issue cannot be overemphasized because it is very critical to the well-being of our people. I have it on good occasion that speaks to the issue of lower levels of economic activities in certain economic sectors. If yesterday, when VAT was 5%, we experienced these lower levels of economic activities, today that VAT is 7.5%, we reach not having economic activities at all. And the consequences are dangerous. I know that in the speech, attempts were made to make it look like the common man has been sequestered from the buffetings that will come. I do not agree. Because even the financial plan that is being proposed has made it clear that aspects of taxation, especially now that our economy is not doing too well, will not do any good to our economy. If you look at item A on the proposed financial bill, you would see, and it reads in the President's speech, promoting fiscal equity by mitigating instances of regressive taxation. If you ask me, I think the plan to increase VAT to 7.5% is clearly an instance of regressive taxation. If you look at item C, introducing tax incentives for investments in infrastructure and capital markets, this situation, for me, of increasing VAT is a shortcut to economic recovery. It smacks of intellectual laziness, and like all shortcuts, I don't think it will drive this country in the right and proper direction. Number two, Mr. President. Number two, I believe that one of the immediate consequences of this VAT increase will be unemployment. Already a lot of our youths are caught in acute despondency. Once you get out of school and you do not find employment, your life speaks of hopelessness. We need to expand our economy. And economic handlers must look for ways original, ways that will not do our economy further harm, expand productivity, and ensure that our youths are employed. When our youths take off, go through dangerous places like Libya, it is because they have looked at themselves and they do not see any future. And they say to themselves, we'd rather die trying to find good living than stay here. And
Please, you have 30 seconds to round up.
We pray that all is done to ensure that this implementation is taken in a direction that is more productive and more benign. Thank you.
My name is Scholar Balogun. I represent Oyo South Senatorial District. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, in looking at this budget, I'd like to draw attention to three socially strategic economic areas, sectors: infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Under infrastructure, Mr. President, Works and Housing has allocation of 262 billion naira, power 127 billion naira, and transportation 123 billion naira. This will give us a combined proposed spending of 502 billion naira. For me, this is a welcome development. It is because the problem we have had in the past really is implementation. Year in, year out, figures have been thrown out in this budget ritual. Yet at the end of the day, it doesn't achieve much for Nigeria. And of course, under your leadership, Mr. President, we have agreed that the Ninth Senate will do its utmost to compel those who are responsible for implementing this budget to do the needful, so that at the end of the day, we can also justify the mandate, our mandate. Mandates are freely given to us by the people. Mr. President, I think we need to get our relevant committees that have to do with this particular sector to be up and doing. Because if we succeed together. We have collective aspiration as a people to jumpstart this economy, to create wealth, to ensure that our youths, teeming unemployed youths, are gainfully employed. So if we invest enough and we ensure implementation, I am sure that we will now be taking the country to the next level of economic prosperity. Mr. President, before the Chief Whip will send me packing, I'd like for us to look at the area of education as well. This sector has 48 billion naira. For me, I think this is meager. Education is the foundation of human development. In a country where we have over 10 million out-of-school children, in a country where we need to close infrastructural deficits in our educational sector, in a country where we need to have funds to train and retrain our teachers.
You can round up.
Finally, Mr. President, healthcare sector has 46 billion naira. You look at this will translate to 230 naira per head in a country of 200 million people. I believe we can do more to justify our mandate. Mr. President, our infrastructure deficit in the health sector is mind-boggling. University teaching
You please round up.
The Commonwealth of Nations. If you visit that hospital today, and I'm sure it's the same story all over the country, you will weep for this country. So I'd like to urge this Senate and by extension the National Assembly leadership to please increase our spending, even if it's not just more than 60 billion in our health sector. Thank you, Mr. President.
For the seat of Enugu State. Mr. President, I would like to join my other colleagues to speak to this budget speech presented by Mr. President. In doing that, Mr. President, I want to congratulate you as the Chairman of National Assembly for pioneering the return of early presentation of budget to the National Assembly. That is very evidently manifest in the first line of Mr. President. The imprimatur is there that he worked to the extent that he got cold in order to meet the deadline of this chairman of the National Assembly. So we thank you for that, and we hope that you continue in that wise. Mr. President, I won't want to repeat what my colleagues have said on this issue, on this budget that has been presented to us. But I want to speak on the paragraph 26, where this budget, like no other, has made foundation for presentation of several bills that will be coming shortly. Number one is the finance bill that is going to come here, and the high point of that is the issues, the objectives that have set out here for that finance bill that we make sure that we create more jobs for our people. Number one is the tax incentive. Ono has spoken about that will help investment in infrastructure. The other issue is the supporting micro, small and medium sized businesses. We have always been talking about how to make sure that the economy of this country is private sector driven. So it's, to that extent, this is very, very important. That the gains we are going to have by the increment in the VAT, notwithstanding the negatives on that, is going to help make sure that these industries, small and micro and small and medium businesses have a breather in this country. Then the other issue is that attracts my attention is for the health. I'm the Senate Committee Chair on Primary Health Care and Communicable Diseases. I'm very happy that in order to achieve the universal health coverage by 2020, that we have made, that this budget has recognized that everything above pharmaceuticals should be exempted from such VAT increments. So for me, that is very, very important, and I hope that implementation will address strictly to this, so that the ordinary people in the rural areas will have access to purchasing medicine, drugs at a relatively cheap rate. And we are using also this opportunity to tell the manufacturers in the pharmaceuticals that if the government, the federation has, the presidency has given them this leeway, that they too should not go and increase the cost of their drugs, so that will be out of reach of the common man on the streets. The other issue I want to speak to this budget is the capital expenditure in this issue. The capital expenditure we talked about the projects the government want to do. Mr. President, we want this budget is a departure from the past, that we are not doing new projects. That is welcome. And I also want to say, because I'm coming from the southeast of this country, I know we have so many abandoned projects in our area. One is the second Niger Bridge. It's very, very important to us because we are businessmen. We are also moving up and down. The other issue is the 9-mile Makurdi Expressway. That is very, very important to us because that's the gateway to the north, and that we take to get to Abuja and beyond. The other issue is I can't read them international airports. We have for over 43 days now. That airport has been closed. Mr. President, we are begging that in this year's budget, now that that place has closed, and that's the only major airport in the southeast, that the federal government should allocate money, since we are not doing new projects, ensure that that airport is done for us. Mr. President,
you can round up.
Mr. President, I want to say that job creation is very, very important to us, and you cannot do it except you have power. Power generation is one of those things that have made sure that most companies have taken flight and left Nigeria. We are with the opinion that this effort in this budget that the president have made, that he will get that done. And finally, the PIB here, Mr. President, that the PIB, Mr. President has already said that he wants to introduce the bills. Since he is taking the leadership now, unlike what we did in 8th Assembly, let those bills come timelessly and let us handle them. If we handle them, the piecemeal approach that we are bringing to the industry will not help anybody here. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remain Senator I.D. Gyang, representing the very good people of Plateau North. Mr. President, I rise to add my voice and that of my constituents to the 2020 budget debate on the floor of the Senate. Mr. President, a lot has been said about the fundamentals of the budget. So much economic analysis, postulations and commentaries have been made on this budget. Mr. President, I will spare us all that. What Nigerians are interested in, Mr. President, is how this budget will translate in real terms and in practical terms to address the security situation in the country, the infrastructure deficit, and of course, human capital development, among others. And in particular, their safety from terrorists, bandits, kidnappers, and so forth. Mr. President, there is palpable fear on the faces of Nigerians from daily threats of insecurity. And that is why the budget that has been, the allocation that has been made to defense of 100 billion to me is grossly inadequate. To the combined armed forces to address the critical issues of security in this country, I would request that the Senate take a look at the budget of defense. How the budget can equally translate to motorable roads, stable power supply, and other basic infrastructure by implication, addressing the decay and gross deficit in our infrastructure is very critical to Nigerians, Mr. President. This is what will spur small businesses and the productive sector if we have stable power supply for their businesses to thrive so that they can equally drive growth of the Nigerian economy. Mr. President, we know that at the end of every economic argument and debate is a political decision. The political will to implement the budget and of course budget making has to demonstrate fairness, equity and inclusivity. For example, Mr. President, my constituents are deeply concerned about the poor showing of Plateau State in the budget over the years, and even in this one. This has been repeated in this year's budget, and is the desire and call of my constituents that the Senate will address this imbalance and to make provision for the Afanga Jos Bauchi Road, and equally to facilitate the completion of the Jos Yakubu Gowon Airport, Hepang. Finally, Mr. President, the issue of the cost of governance can be addressed partly through drastic review of project costs in our procurement processes. Presently, the costs are outrageously scandalous, and this has to stop. I therefore urge this Senate to ensure that we take a look at our procurement cost, our project cost, on comparative basis vis-à-vis other countries. On this note, Mr. President, it is my concern that the security situation, the infrastructure deficit, and the procurement cost be addressed as we would be deliberating on the details of the budget. Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let me say my name is Dinos Daudayaro, representing Adamawa South. I'd like to start by adding my voice in commending the leadership of the National Assembly, working with the presidency to effect a return to a calendar year budget cycle. History will record this as an important achievement of the 9th Assembly. Having said that, Mr. President, I would like to commend the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the timeliness in submitting this budget. Not only the timeliness in submitting the budget, but also in increasing the VAT by 50% from 5%.
Senator Albert Basi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope they will adjust my time. I am commending Mr. President for adjusting the budget, the VAT component of the budget by 50%, but in doing that, removing enterprises that have turnover of less than 25 million naira from the VAT net, and also increasing the number of items that are excluded from VAT. Having said that, Mr. President, I would like to raise a few concerns that I have over this 2020 budget. The first is the oil revenue forms a major component of the budget. There is no doubt about that. But my concern has to do with the basis of arriving at the oil revenue component of the budget. The 2.18 million barrels per day assumed, I think it is over-ambitious because it has to depend on total security in the Niger Delta region. And from past experience, it cannot be 1 more minute, Mr. Whip.
Go ahead.
So, my concern is that 2.18 assumed as a average production per day is over ambitious. Again, the $57 per day price is also over ambitious. When we consider that today the cost of crude, Brent crude, is $59 per barrel. So we are over ambitious in our estimation. and I fear that we may not meet our revenue targets. Having said that, Mr. President, I have looked at the structure of the budget, and I see that there is no balance. Why do I say that? The revenue estimates for 2020 is 8.155 trillion naira. The expenditure estimate is 10.7 trillion naira, which means that we are earning less than what we are projecting to spend. We are spending more than what we are earning. That is an imbalance. The second imbalance is the capital versus the recurrent expenditure. The capital is only 2.46 trillion, while the recurrent is 8.24 trillion. Virtually the entire earnings that we are making is going into recurrent expenditure. Again, the capital versus the total expenditure. Capital of 2.46 versus total expenditure of 10 trillion is only 23%. So this imbalance ought to be addressed. Finally, Mr. President, to me, the 2020 federal budget is only a budget of consumption, because virtually the entire earnings we are projected to make in 2020 is going to go towards recurrent expenditure. The debt that we are going to take is the little amount that we are reserving for capital expenditure. So I believe, Mr. President, that we need to address this.
Senator Michael Amanachi, representing the people of Ebonyi South. Mr. President, I thank the President of the country for nicknaming this budget of sustaining growth and job creation. He has a good dream, and he dreamt well. But the interpreters of the dream are not following the dream the way it went. Mr. President, many have said about VAT. They've said about procurement process. As a quantity surveyor, I'll state clearly here that the increase of the VAT is not in favor of this budget. The reason is this. During the independence speech of the President, he made mention of how he is going to transform power sector by new ideas and initiatives from 3-phase to 7 phases. He also talked about how tax relief or free tax incentive scheme introduced has brought about a gain of 205 billion. If we want to take up this point, because of incentive, we got 205 billion. And at the same time, within few months, we are now killing the incentive by increasing the VAT. I think it's not a good position for us now. If we look at the present VAT we have, the ones that are not mentioned here openly are more than 3. If you increase the VAT to 7.5% today, a contractor or an investor who is coming, he still pay educational tax of 1%, he will pay ITF of 1%, he will pay NISTF of 1%, and sometimes goes behind to pay some percentage to ruling party. These taxes are not mentioned. What is the result of the product the man will stand with? So for that reason, I am not in support of this VAT increase, because the VAT already not mentioned is already over 9%. And if you now add them to this, we are now having 10.5% as VAT in the country. It's a burden today for us to achieve this sustaining growth and job creation. Another area my colleague has mentioned, which I tend to agree with them, is about procurement. I'm afraid, Mr. President, we are just having a budget laid down here 2 days ago, and we are having a projection of 2.18 trillion. which is far above the capital budget of 2.114 trillion. Why are we already projecting deficit of 2.18 trillion when we have not even started? The reason is, I think our procurement system is very poor, and we need to correct it. If I'm to project and suggest, we should have year 1 to be for procurement preparations. Year 2 should be the implementation of these projects. If we are projecting a deficit of 2.18 above the capital project, colleagues, this is dangerous, and we cannot continue. And if fiscal responsibility organization or body will be projecting 3% deficit, while the president himself is projecting 1.5%, we have to look into it as a Senate of 9th Assembly. Mr. President, I therefore submit. Thank you.
Of Octo State. Mr. President, let me start by joining many other speakers in commending Mr. President, who are well articulated and well focused on the 2020 budgets of this great country. I'm so happy that the budget intends to address the devastation of our economy, with millions of jobs were teeming unemployed youth in the country by way of investing heavily on agriculture. Mr. President, even though the sum of 83 billion has been allocated to the sector, though the amount of money that is sunk into a sector that would make the impact, but there must be some kind of mechanism, feedback mechanism, to show how close are we to achieving a particular target or otherwise. For example, we need to know how many metric tons of rice do we intend to produce in 2019, 2020, 2021, and so forth, and what have been obtained, what are the shortfall, what are the surplus. Unless we have that kind of mechanisms, I think it will take time to achieve our desired objective of food security in this country. Because merely closing our borders against any importation of food doesn't solve the problem. What is needed is true investment into the sector, and to invest also in the sector, there must be sustained incentives as practiced in other parts of the world. There is no country that has ever succeeded in its agricultural reforms for sector without a subsidy regime. Even in our fellow African countries in Tunisia, they have 25% subsidy on agriculture every year, any farmer or their farmers. In Pakistan, it's 40%, and also 10% for droughts and other natural disasters. And unless we have such kind of approach to the sector in this country, our dream may take time to be achieved. So I feel that in this year's budget, the federal government should introduce more incentive to farming to make it attractive and so profitable, Mr. President. Equally, Mr. President, I want to call for a better funding of our judiciary, because just earlier in the year, the CJN was here for his confirmation, and he gave a very good picture of our judiciary, their financial position, to the extent that 76% of our inmates in this country are awaiting trial, which is very sad and unbecoming for any nation to be called a serious nation. Equally, Mr. President, I want to use this opportunity to commend Mr. President for raising our foreign reserve from 20 to 40 billion in just a matter of 4 years. I think that is a very commendable effort. Mr. President, I thank you and I rest my case.
Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ibikunle Amosu, I represent Ogun Central. Mr. President, let me first congratulate all of us and congratulate Mr. President for presenting the budget on time. And this is the way it should be. And I'm sure that with the resolve of the National Assembly, I'm sure the budget will be passed on time, because this is what we say all of the time, and you are working your thought. Let me say this budget of 10.3 trillion. Yes, I've listened to some of my colleagues. We have some areas where we are not totally comfortable with. But I dare say, this budget, all the underlying assumptions of this budget, they are measured, they are realizable, because budget is a statement of intent. And when you budget yourself too tight, because I noticed that this budget is like the government, they've now budgeted themselves too tight. They want to not underperform this time, they want to surpass all the estimates that they've put into this budget. But Mr. President, we need to do some things. And I would say that maybe I can say 3 things to make sure that this budget works. And that is to increase our revenue. And the platform to use, or the better way of achieving this revenue, is through diversification. Because each time we have issues like this, if you look critically, you will see that everything revolves around what we are able to generate. And I'm happy in a way with this budget. Just like what I said, if you look at all the underlying assumptions, they are not something that it will be too difficult for the government to achieve. Even if you look at the benchmark, if you look at the volume of production on a daily basis, these are things that I think is achievable, particularly looking at where we are now. If we are doing about 1.96, because we have 1.86 plus a buffer stock of 100,000 barrels per day, if you add those, it's almost 2 million. And saying 2.18, I think is achievable. Mr. President, for us to do anything, for an economy to develop, infrastructures must be there. And that is why we just must be hungry for development through development of our infrastructure. If you look at this budget, about $500 billion, a little over $500 billion, is specifically dedicated for infrastructure. Because without infrastructure, whatever we save from morning to night, nothing will happen. I've listened to some of my colleagues too, expectedly so, that they felt that the amount of money budgeted for all this service-oriented ministry, they are too maybe small or low. Yes, I agree with them, but clearly, how can you have an effective healthcare delivery system if the powers are not there, if you don't have access to water, if you cannot even move to those hospitals? So clearly, we need to be hungry for development. And if you look at this budget, you will realize that those areas, power, transportation, I just started, and works. If you look at them, you will realize that we are laying that solid foundation for development. Because clearly, we cannot even trade amongst ourselves, among states. The time it will take you to move from maybe Abeokuta to Ekiti, you'll have been in London. It's because our infrastructures are not just there. We cannot trade within ourselves, not to talk of West African sub-region, not to talk within Africa. There is no train that you can take to say, okay, I want to go to Ghana. It's not possible. Even within Nigeria, to even go to our various constituencies. For you to go to your constituency, Mr. President, sir, you know what you go to. So clearly, infrastructure is key. And when you look at all of this, by the time we diversify our economy, we will have been in a position to get our people to work. Without creating wealth for our people, without employment.
You can round up.
Yes, I'm rounding up now, Mr. President. We cannot. If you look, our expenditure is growing. No problems with that. But we need to grow maybe fourfold our revenue. Once we do that, all this talk of we have huge debt service will be reduced when we increase our revenue. We may not even need to borrow up to that when we're able to reduce our revenue. On this very, very, what I call short comments, I want to say that this budget is workable. All we need to do is all of us to play our part, and I'm happy with what we are presently doing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, I would like...
As members of the National Assembly, working for the good of this country, we have no choice but to support Mr. President. And I believe, Mr. President, in supporting Mr. President, we are equally supporting ourselves and helping the average Nigerians. We are also very conscious with the President of the fact that based on the President's speech, there is a global downturn in the global economy. While in Africa economy is growing. I am sure the growth of African economy can be attributed to the loans that African countries are getting from China to grow the economy. And of course, there is a greater exposure to China by developing nations. So we have to be very cautious with the President. Even looking at the parameters based on the achievement of the 2019 budget, despite the fact that it's a budget for just 6 months, 6 months to about 8-9 months. Mr. President, the figures are not quite encouraging. It is the responsibility of this National Assembly to ensure that we bring down what needs to be brought down in the course of this budget defense. Because even looking at the projections for 2020, Mr. President, I'm only worried about the level of deficit financing, which is 2.8 trillion. We also have, if we take that issue with other revenue sources, I just hope that we are not planning to sell our stake in the joint venture. Because we cannot afford to mortgage the future of our children, to ensure that we meet the needs of the present times. Instead, Mr. President, what should be encouraging government as the National Assembly is to ensure that we go into another bid round. Because since the last time we did this was in 2007. And I know that as a country we can generate a lot of resources towards ensuring this. And also shoring up our revenue, Mr. President, I'm also very happy that you are pursuing the issue of the amendment of the Deep Offshore Inland Basin Act with all vigor. Because through this, as the President has stated in his budget speech, we can bring an additional revenue of over $400 million for this year, then $1 billion for next year. So I think it's a matter of national significance. And I want to assure Mr. President that on Monday we'll be holding the stakeholders engagement on this all-important bill between my committee, upstream, my brother, finance, and the gas committee. Mr. President, I believe that as the National Assembly, I must also commend Mr. President for insisting that there is no new project that will be brought into the 2020 budget. Let us focus our energy and deploy resources to complete ongoing projects. And I think that's quite a good strategy of Mr. President in ensuring that there is no new project that will be brought in. Let efforts be made towards the completion of all ongoing projects. Mr. President, if you look at the issues the worries that have been raised by our colleagues, I think the concerns are quite fundamental. So I believe that the Committee on Appropriation and the Committee on Finance, headed by my two brothers, has a Herculean task to balance the submissions of the President. But we must ensure that whatsoever we do as a National Assembly must reflect content, equitable distribution of available resources to the good of all Nigerians, no matter where they reside. I think on this note, Mr. President, I'm very confident that there is hope for this country. I'm very confident that there is hope for Nigeria and there is hope for all of us. So we should not make any mistakes to exercise any worries at all. We should rise up to the challenge and conquer these fears and these worries for our people. Thank you, Mr. President, and God.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate Mr. President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammad Buhari, for the coherence he exhibited when he presented the 2020 budget estimate to the National Assembly on Tuesday. It was marvelous. It was marvelous. It showed comportment, it shows dexterity, it shows wisdom. And I want to commend you too for giving us the right leadership
of ensuring that there's a U-turn in the presentation of budgetary estimates to the National Assembly. Instead of doing it in May and June, that it is done much earlier than before. Let me come in straight, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, to what my observations are about this 2020 budget estimate that has been presented and has been so discussed by these hallowed chambers since a few days ago. I will look at, because the budget is titled Budget of Sustaining Growth and Job Creation. Therefore, my focus shall be on a few critical areas that can stimulate growth and provoke job creation to our teeming unemployed youth. Because I want to speak on behalf of the Opoloi, the poor. There are so many poor people in Nigeria. And this is occasioned because of the bad or the poor leadership that we have been having over the years. But I thank God that at least we now starting to have direction. I know that budget is a mere estimate, but then the budget could be made to work. For the experience that most of us have gathered over the years in public service, we know that budget could work. In Nigeria, since the advent of independence, before we took over from our founding fathers, we have roads from the north to the south. I thought we should have have a definitive route that would ease communication, that would ease transportation of goods and services from the north, that is much endowed with agricultural produce, to the south, that we have much of the Atlantic Oceans and the hydrocarbon, that they could be conveyed not necessarily by road, but it could be conveyed by rail. I have had distinguished senators just talking about China. Mr. President of the Senate and distinguished colleagues, when shall we look like China? In 1993, China was not what it is today. But between a span of time, China has developed. They could have a rail line taking them from Shanghai to Beijing in couples of hours. Why is it that we make our budget without considering this serious infrastructural deficit? Why is it that it is only in Nigeria that the rail line that is costing, even in Rwanda, that is costing in Uganda $5 million to produce a 1 kilometer of rail line, Nigeria will cost $56 million. Why don't we question ourselves? It leads us to ineptness, it leads us to incompetence, to greed, that we are not sincere. So what this budget called for, that has been so presented by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is that it calls for commitment. If we commit ourselves, if we are resolute to change the circumstances of people, then whatever is available will be utilized properly. So I'm going to tell myself, but look at our Ajakuta steel rolling mill. We are talking about...
You can round up.
Exporting papers that could be utilized in taking care of the other services, social services, providing education, providing healthcare services to the people. We are busy in...
A round up, please.
Much as we are debating the basic principles, the philosophy underlined this budget that has been presented by Mr. President, sir, by the time we get into the nitty-gritty of fine-tuning the budget and putting it at the doorstep of the executive for implementation, we should consider the revival of most of these industries that are moribund. Since my time is taken off, I have much to say, but I don't want to go into other areas that my colleagues have already spoken about, the 5%, the VAT, but I think the VAT that has been introduced is anti-people. I so submit, sir. Thank you very much.
President, I'm Senator Akoniyayi, representing Akwa Ibom South Senatorial District. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I want to join others to say that it is a thing of joy that the executive and the parliamentary arm of government have given their commitment to ensure that Nigeria have the best leadership. And in terms of the budget that we are talking about, Mr. President, you've been dogged, you encouraged everyone, the National Assembly reps joined hands together to encourage the executive to ensure that we return the budgetary cycle to January to December budget cycle. I want to congratulate you and the National Assembly, the executive, for this commitment. I have gone through, Mr. President, the budget speech of our president. Just like other senators have contributed, critiqued the speech, I want to highlight three major areas. The first and the most important has to do with the education sector. Nigeria has myriads of problems and challenges, such as the high level of illiteracy, poverty, insecurity, and others. All this, Mr. President, has to do with the concern that we give to the education sector. Any country that wants to grow and develop should invest in education and manpower. Our budgetary estimates for education generally in the 2020 budget, I want to say, is inadequate, because in this sector we have a lot of schools, we have commissions, we have higher institutions to take care of, we have the teachers to train, we have the infrastructures to develop to encourage this sector. Nigeria has the highest number of out-of-school children in the world. More than 10.5 million of Nigerian children between the ages of 5 to 14 are not in school. In the north, we have a meager 53% attendance rate of children in school. And more than half of our girls in the northeast and the northwest are not in school. This gives a lot of concern. Our educational problems need a revolution or declaration of state of emergency to take care of this. And as such, the 1.5% which has been allocated in the 2020 budget is grossly inadequate. If we look at UNESCO's recommendation advising developing countries to allocate between 15 to 20% of the budget, of the country's budget to education, Nigeria is far below the standard, this recommendation. And so something should be done about this. Education is the fundamental foundation upon which developed societies are built, and Nigeria should key into this. Mr. President, I want to also add a voice to the issue of VAT increase in the 2020 budget to 7.5%. I would rather want to advise that the federal government should look at a way of increasing revenue by putting up measures to ensure that the VAT that is to be collected is collected and put into.
Distinguished, you have to round up now.
Not lose track of addressing peculiar challenges in every part of the nation, particularly, sir, as it relates to infrastructure decay in the Niger Delta and the rising insecurity in the nation. We owe our nation.
Distinguished, try to round up, please. Thank you very much.
Distinguished colleagues, let me first commend the President of Nigeria, Muhammad Buhari, and also the leaders of the National Assembly for changing the budget cycle. And we hope that, of course, by changing the budget cycle, the implementation will be accordingly. Of course, we knew before that each quarter something will be released. Unlike now, that of course maybe only at the end of the year you see that either 30 or 40% of the budget is released, and that's the end of it. So hopefully that with the creation, with the change of the budget cycle, this one also will change. And also, let me commend them for the reforms of the social investment program, with the creation of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. Especially that now we have many IDPs everywhere. That of course, this disaster management now will come under this ministry, and now they will take care of it properly. Mr. President, let me look at the increase in the GDP growth. I believe we can look inwards and assist the local producers in various sectors of the economy. The economic transformation will be incomplete without turning the development bank. Of course, these development banks like Agricultural Bank, Nexim Bank, this Development Industries Bank. So all these banks are there at least to assist the growth of the GDP. But it's unfortunate, Mr. President, these banks are not performing at least as expected. So definitely we have to look at what is the what happened that these development banks are not performing, so that at least it will assist in the GDP increase in the GDP growth. And also, when we look at the proposed increase in the VAT, definitely, Mr. President, this will have an effect, because a large effect on the price of goods and services not included in the VAT exception list which of course the common man will suffer. So definitely, if we have to look at this VAT increase, because at least for me the 5% is okay. Once you increase the VAT, definitely the prices will go up, because one thing of this country, even the woman selling a caraba at the roadside will tell you that yes, if the dollar rises, no, the dollar has risen. Now the VAT increase, they will tell you yes, the VAT has been increased, therefore they will increase the prices. So you see that of course at the end of the day it affects the common man. So Mr. President, we have to look at two issues. And then thirdly, our budget should always be realistic based on our revenue. Of course, there's no need always we have a budget that at the end of the day we have deficit. So why can't you, no matter if of course we are expecting to get maybe 10 kobo, let's at least base our budget on that, so that at the end of the day we will not be having deficit and then be borrowing at least to take care of this deficit. And our budget implementation, Mr. President, hopefully that of course maybe with the change of the budget cycle something will be done. Because for the last 5 years...
You can round up, please.
Can be developed would of course always pay salary only throughout there.
with that capital project. So therefore, I hope these points I highlighted will be looked into so that, yes, this budget of 2020 will be different and will add value.
Please round up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished and noble colleagues. Mr. President, let me begin by joining earlier contributors in first commending the leadership of our two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, in the determination and commitment to ensure that we are returned back to a stable fiscal period of January to December. And from what has happened within the last 1 week, it is confirmed that by the grace of God, this fiscal year of January-December has come to stay. Mr. President, I also want to join earlier speakers in commending the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for coming up with a budget specifying some top priorities that will really touch the lives of our citizens. It is one thing to have the budget. Mr. President, is yet another to have the budget properly implemented, especially in terms of fund releases, to identify with the priorities identified in the budget. In paragraph 23 of Mr. President's speech, he identified the budget priorities for 2020 as human development and job creation. Mr. President, these are certainly the topmost priorities for any nation that would like to grow. When you talk of human development, it is about the most important agent of growth and development. Job creation certainly is another aspect that will address the persistent problem of unemployment in our nation. And I want to emphasize, Mr. President, and draw the attention of my colleagues on our oversight assignment to ensure that funds released to government agencies and departments are certainly applied in line with the priorities identified by Mr. President and identified in the budget. My second intervention, Mr. President, is on the issue of the increase in the VAT from 5% to 7.5%. Initially, when I heard of the increase by the Federal Executive Council, I was certainly very worried. But my worries were greatly relieved, Mr. President, after listening to Mr. President's presentation and speech on the day he laid the budget on the floor of the chambers, by emphasizing that the VAT will be exempting some identified items, and most of the 10 to 15 items identified by Mr. President are really items that have direct impact on the lives of our citizens, food items in particular. My worries were relieved, Mr. President, that in the end, the VAT would not be severely hitting the basic needs of our citizens. And finally, Mr. President, I'm impressed by the President's intention to improve the welfare of our police and the armed forces. This is a very welcome development. There is no way we'll expect the armed forces and the police to put their lives on the line with hunger and misery. They deserve every attention to really encourage them to put in their best in the service of our nation. Mr. President, on the whole, I emphasize the fact that we need to intensify our oversight assignment to ensure that the aspirations and expectations in the budget provisions are realized by the grace of Almighty God. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Sadiq Umar.
I am Sadiq Sulaiman Umar. I represent the decent people of Paranat. Mr. President, let me first thank the executives for taking up the challenge that led to the submission of this budget early enough, even though the President ended up with a cold. My distinguished colleagues, the ball is now in our court to retaliate by making sure we pass this budget before December. And that exactly is what we are going to do by the grace of God. Mr. President, my interest in this budget speech is in 5 key areas. 1, the 2019 budget performance. The President did say that the revenue performance is at a meager 58%. And as a former teacher, 58% is just a credit. And for us to move Nigeria to the next level, we need to start having distinctions. So, Mr. President, 2020 budget has to move to over 70%. And to do that, we need to ensure that we diversify our economy. We need to ensure that the leakages the President spoke of in item number 14, for example, the higher expenditure on pipeline security and maintenance and frontier exploration has to be taken care of going forward. Mr. President, the good news for me in 2020 budget is what the President spoke of in paragraph 23, where he did say that the 2020 budget is designed to be a budget of fiscal consolidation, investment in critical infrastructure, human capital development, job creation, and so on, incentivizing private sector investment, and enhancing our social investment programs. Mr. President, this framework of this budget as designed is the key to our movement to the next level. As beautiful as it is implementation that is the key. And that in itself lies under our purview as the representatives of the people. We need to ensure our oversight functions so that this is implemented as designed. Mr. President, I'm interested in health and education budget. I've taken a cursory look at what this country has been budgeting for health and education in the last 10 years. And the average for health was 5.4%. That of education is 8%. But in this budget, this has gone below the average. We are now at 4.1% and 7%. And this is worrisome because development is directly tied to education and health. And we need to start paying more attention. Given that UNESCO, for example, recommends 26% for education, and we are talking of 4.1% today. For health, the AU in Abuja declaration spoke of 15%, and we are budgeting mere 4.1%. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
My name is Senator Clifford Ahimemona Odia. representing Edo Central and Federal District. Let me begin, Mr. President, by thanking you from the bottom of my heart for keeping faith with your promise of returning the budget cycle between January and December. And I think we are making progress in that direction. And let me also thank Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari for submitting the 2020 budget right on time. Mr. President, my very distinguished colleagues, this budget of sustainable growth and job creation is very apt at this point in time in the history of our national development. Because when fully implemented, it will go a long way to removing our youth from our streets. Secondly, Mr. President, the road infrastructural tax credit scheme is commendable. However, Mr. President, the amount of 205 billion as provided in the 2020 budget is grossly inadequate. Because I believe that the infrastructural development of this country needed to be handled holistically with timelines. But this is the only way to be able to attract investors in this country. I want to also commend Mr. President for providing 296 billion sinking fund for payment of local contractors. It's also very, very commendable. I just hope, Mr. President, that the petty contractors that are being owed 500,000, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million for an upward of 4 years should be adequately taken into consideration, in this regard. Mr. President, let me talk about the current conditions of our the manufacturing sector. You agree with me that this sector is supposed to be one of the major sectors that is supposed to contribute to our GDP. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Presently, the manufacturing sector, and in fact the private sector, only contributes about 9% to our GDP. This is not good, and it's not good to help create the right environment that will create jobs for our young school leavers and these all those that are unemployed. Finally, Mr. President, if we must develop, government must pay serious attention to infrastructural development like power and roads. Government must take it as a duty to make sure that the major arterial roads in this country are given special attention. This is the only way we'll be able to make sure that production activities and businesses all over the country will be greatly enhanced. Thank you very much.
Distinguished colleagues, I.G. London is the name. Representing South. Mr. President, I went through the 2020 budget very thoroughly and observed some areas of concern which I think I should say something about. Mr. President, considering the infrastructural deficit, the President is determined to make the difference. And consciously, Mr. President has allocated a lion's share of the budget estimate to the Ministry of Works and Power, Works, Housing and Power. And he allocated, Mr. President allocated 262 billion to Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, and also 127 billion to the Ministry of power. Now, when we are looking at this, Mr. President, we know that we have a very serious problem with the works, because most of the roads in Nigeria today, the federal roads, are in a very bad condition, and therefore this allocation is very much in order that the lion's share should be given to the Ministry of Works so that these roads can be put in order. These are the roads that, in most cases, you see the armed robbers, some other criminals stand by to harass all travelers. And if these roads are not put in order, we will continue to suffer that. And I think there's a good wisdom in allocating this huge sum for the Ministry of Works and Housing. Looking at the power also, we need power. Because without power, we cannot have industries in the country, and then development becomes a problem. And so this allocation for the power, it is also appreciative, because we need the light. Stability of light in Nigeria is still very unrealistic. We don't have light, and the powers are always off. Now, the second observation, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, is the VAT increase. Now, this increase in VAT from 5% to 7.5%, we want to appreciate that. But at the same time, is this increase in VAT that Mr. President is saying that it should be used to fund education and health and infrastructure. If we take education, for example, we know that even at the rural areas, we have a mass of Nigerians who are in need of education. When you come to the cities, we need a lot of we have a lot of Nigerians also who are in need of education. To me, this 48 billion for education is inadequate. It's not enough for education. And also looking very quickly at the other organization like the health. Again, to me, the 46 billion is inadequate. Now, we need most of the hospitals, Mr. President. You will see that they don't have medical facilities. If you take example with the teaching hospital, let's take that of it's virtually, when you go there with any emergency, it is either this equipment is not there or this item is not there. Then what are we talking about? That our teaching hospitals are well equipped. Nothing is well equipped. And that is why most people go abroad for medical attention, and thereby they spend our money that should have been used in Nigeria overseas. The final one, Your Excellency, I look at Mr. President is trying to offset the liabilities that we incur. And that is unprecedented. It is something new in Nigeria. In the past, a lot of money borrowed, but they were not properly used. They were misused. Now, Mr. President is using this money to offset all the liabilities so that we don't leave any problem to our younger generation. And I think it's a very good move that Mr. President has done. Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you.
We spoke earlier in commending Mr. President for transmitting the budget estimate early to the National Assembly. Mr. President has matched word with action by doing this. And I want to commend him and commend him greatly. It is not only about sending the estimate to the National Assembly, Mr. President. We must avoid the pitfalls of the past. We know that once these estimates come, it is time to invite the MDAs to defend their budget. And we must make sure that these chief executives do not frustrate our efforts. Mr. President, I will expect you to use your position and the relationship between the legislature and the executive, which you have fostered, to ensure that the MDAs are alive to their responsibilities by coming on time to defend their budget. And after looking at the defense of the budget, Mr. President, we have another major assignment to ensure releases to the different ministries, the different MDAs. In the past, it is heartwarming to see the excess of 620 billion naira in the recurrent for 2020. This is aimed at tackling the labor issue at a time labor is threatening to close down and shut the economy. It is heartwarming that Mr. President has intervened. And also this money in the recurrent is supposed to also take care of our police and the armed forces. And this will go a long way in motivating the police and the armed forces, especially at this time when they really need to be motivated to fight criminality and brigandage and militancy in Nigeria. So that is a good one. I will also want to take a look at the issue of the VAT. A lot of distinguished senators have spoken on the issue of VAT. The VAT increased from 5% to 7.5%. Mr. President, the issue of the VAT increase is one that is supposed to come to the National Assembly for review and approval. And I'm not sure that has been done. And for me, I think it's a makeshift arrangement targeted at revenue generation. For me, I also think that we should broaden the tax base so that we are able to raise our revenue and get more money. And we should target those who are supposed to be paying tax but they are not paying tax. So this is just a makeshift solution to quickly generate revenue. And I think going forward, we must also look at the area of non-oil export as sources of revenue generation. And Mr. President, this 2020 budget, we are expecting to spend a quarter of the budget in debt servicing. And as we are doing that also, we are also borrowing to fund part of the 2020 budget. And I think...
You can round up.
I'm rounding up, Mr. President. We should do everything to exit from further debt as a nation. And let me also quickly say that the health sector, I think the 46 billion allocated to the health sector is paltry. Because if we have to check medical tourism, we should be able to fund the health sector properly so that we will make sure we check the funds we are losing to other countries in terms of medical tourism. And non-implementation of the 2019 budget is also an area of concern. And not much was said about the non-implementation of the 2019 budget. So that's an area we also have to look at. It creates confusion because we...
Please round up.
My name is Betty Apiapi. I represent Rivers West Nigeria District. I'm from Rivers State. Mr. President, let me join my colleagues to commend you for making it possible for us to debate this budget on time and to return to the December-January budget cycle. And also to thank my colleagues for all the contributions so far made. Mr. President and my distinguished colleagues, I have some misgivings about the fundings of the budget of 2020. With a debt portfolio of 20 trillion, debt service of 2.4 trillion, higher than our capital budget of 1.18 billion, it means that we are not going to find funds to implement our capital budget. I would like to reflect on the 2019 budget, where only a paltry sum of 294.6 billion has been released for capital projects as at September 2019. Most worrisome is the fact that as at June in 2019, our budget was already in the budget expenditure for 2019 was already in deficit of 1.35 trillion. This deficit is what is delaying implementation of the capital budget. So, given the same indices that we are using in 2019 to raise revenue in 2020, it is really worrisome if we can meet our revenue targets. It is also important for us to know that in 2019 we spent 1.14 trillion, and in 2020 we are going to spend 2.14 trillion, and in 2020 we are going to spend 2.45 trillion for debt servicing. Debt servicing simply means absorbing the interest on our loan portfolio. Our loan portfolio as at today is about 24 trillion naira. We have not started paying the principal sum. It's just the interest we are servicing. This is actually very worrisome because every year, if we don't do something drastic, we'll keep increasing our loan portfolio and increasing the debt service. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I know the Senate is working hard to look at ways to increase revenues, like the amendment of the revenue sharing, the contracts with the PSC contract with OICs. And of course, the government has come up with VAT increase of 50%, which I believe will actually do little or nothing to our revenue profile. But I'd like to refer us to page 3, section 14 of the President's speech, where the President said the revenue performance of the 2019 budget was only 58%, and that the budget target was underperformed because both the oil and non-oil revenues, specifically oil revenues, were below target of 49% as of June 2019. He also said that this reflects the lower than budgeted oil production, deduction of under recovery. So the low performance of the oil sector budget was due to under recovery. What is under recovery? Under recovery is fuel subsidy. Mr. President, my honorable colleagues, it is no longer history to know that before 2017, the fuel subsidy budget used to be in the national budget, debated in the House, and the National Assembly has the opportunity to monitor that cost. But from 2017, NNPC decided to absorb the fuel subsidy as a balance sheet item in their books and called it under recovery. So NNPC is now importing fuel, paying themselves under recovery. What happened to Petroleum Product Regulatory Agency? That is the agency that is supposed to regulate petroleum pricing and determine the supply and distribution of petroleum products in Nigeria. NNPC has usurped the powers of that agency as well as the powers of the National Assembly by making fuel subsidy a balance sheet item in their books. Between April 2018 and 2019, NNPC paid as high as 650 billion as costs for under recovery, higher than we have ever paid as a nation. And the question I ask myself is, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to reduce this? Because this is the easiest way we can raise funds to fund our budget. If our capital budget as of 2019 has been funded by only about 200 billion, and NNPC is spending 650 billion, then it means that we really need to do something about this petroleum subsidy issue to ensure that the 20...
I'm giving you 2 more minutes. Being gender sensitive.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, of course, a lot has been said about the need for us to move away from the traditional ways of funding our budget. That can never be overemphasized. We need to really move away from that. And to conclude, I'd like to commend you for making a commitment to the petroleum industry bill Because, Mr. President, we need to unbundle NNPC if we have to make progress with funding our budgets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator.
Mr. President, I'm going to confine myself to only one item that is of concern to me from the budget speech of the President, because almost everything that I need to talk about has been thoroughly debated by my other colleagues. And that, Mr. President, is the budgetary provision for the social investment program, which is now being moved to another ministry. Mr. President, from 2016 to date, or to 2019, we budgeted about 1.5 trillion for the social investment program. And the actual spending, as explained by the SIP office, is about 470 billion naira, which is an average of about 157 billion in actual spending a year. And this is going to about 4 places: the SIP, the school feeding program, the cash transfer, the JEEP program, and of course Empower under various whatever. Mr. President, what is of concern to me is that I can only see 30 billion naira slated for SIP program in this year's budget. Now, whether that's a typo, looking at the historical budget provision, or whether maybe in the details of the budget there will be another provision, possibly under the new ministry, is something I'm yet to see. But if it is only 30 billion, then, Mr. President, it's a cause for concern, because the SIP program, even though it's in its infancy, has been a program that has attracted a lot of commendation from international observers. It's being supported by the World Bank. And for some states that have a large rural population and where poverty bites hardest, these SIP programs are the only direct link that the common man has with the national government. I'll give you an example, Mr. President. In my state, we have over 100,000 cash transfer beneficiaries in only 1/3 of our local government. And we are supposed to be rolling out this program in the other 18 local governments. And my concern is that this 30 billion that I'm seeing in the budget, if that is really what has been set aside for SIP, is not even enough to support the school feeding program, which is currently feeding about 9.5 million children, and is supposed to move to about 12 million sometime next year. So, Mr. President, that's my concern, really. The SIP program was a wonderful program, very transparent program, and really something that has attracted the attention of a lot of developmental partners who have lent their support. If we are now saying that in 2020 we have reduced the budget by over 90%, then I think, Mr. President, is going to be an issue that really will have a ripple effect, especially for frontline states like mine, and especially in my constituency. I think that's about all I have as an observation in the budget, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Yusuf Abubakar Yusuf.
Yusuf, I represent Taraba Central. First of all, Mr. President, I want to commend the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for being able to present his budget despite the fact that he had colds. And I believe, as some of us have also caught that cold, that we are working so hard to make sure that we deliver this budget to the people of Nigeria. Having said so, a lot of issues have been said about appropriation, because for me, what we are discussing is fundamental is looking at the budget in totality. As a result of that, the 2020 budget estimates, focus on fiscal consolidation, investing in critical infrastructure, human capital development, and enabling institutions in key job creation. This is the thrust for 2020. But is it achievable? If it is achievable, we have to take cognizance of the few other issues. One of the issues is the unstable global economy. There's nothing we can do about that. It's beyond us. The other one is reliance on one product, that is oil, which is subject to exogenous variable price.
Senator Oregide, leave dinner alone, please.
Security situation in Niger Delta, slow process of diversification, gradual import substitution drive, and inordinate taste for foreign goods. These are issues that will impinge strongly on the achievement of whether we will have fiscal consolidation, whether we will have good investment in critical infrastructure. Having said so, sir, the critical budget assumptions are just figures that we are playing with. But really, the exchange rate of 305 official and 357 commercial, we need to do a lot in order to bridge the gap, because government is doing its own business at 305, other sectors of the economy is doing at 357, and the rest is not going to give us a good performance budget. To me, we must find how to bridge this gap. And how do we bridge that gap? How to bridge the gap, sir? We must supervise CBN and Ministry of Finance properly so that we can close all the loopholes in generating foreign exchange, because that is where it pays us most. Today in this country, sir, even hotels are dealers in foreign exchange. It's terrible. We all travel outside this country. Go to China. With dollars, no hotel collect your dollars. You go to a bank and change. But here, go to a hotel, pay dollar and do. Dollar has become even a major currency of Nigeria instead of Naira. And it's terrible, sir. These are the things that will impinge negatively on our budget until we sit down very well and close all the loopholes. What are the loopholes? We must create liquidity in foreign exchange earnings. OICs are not repatriating export proceeds. The purpose for repatriating is to make sure that liquidity is created in foreign exchange, and that will increase the value of the Naira. And once the value of the Naira is increased, all other subsidies are well taken care of. Sir, let me talk about AMCON.
You have a minute and a half.
AMCON is carrying about 5 trillion naira in debts. They cannot recover this money, sir. Let us not think that they will recover anything. They will not recover that money. So, and it is a sovereign guarantee because it is in contingent liability. Contingent liability. What do? We say are going to recover. Banks loan out this money. They were private loans, and they have now become public loans. So for me, I think we must review the status of AMCON, because 5 trillion is not a small amount of money we are going to joke with. Also, sir, we must reform, our civil service. We are talking about 2.something trillion in contracts, sir. And there's a lot of insider trading in these things. We have civil servants and public servants who are contractors themselves. Take the 2.something trillion, 10 to 12% of it is going to tax. 15% of it, 20-25% of it will go to profit to the contractors. Then the administrators probably will take 15%. Do you think that this .something trillion, if you remove about 40% of that going to these services, you have money to do the capital budgeting? No. So, sir, for me, it is not just putting numbers, this one goes to this one goes to that, this one goes to that. The fundamental issue is how do we control these issues? Finally, sir, I will talk about Mambila Hydro. I have listened to Mr. President very, very well, I've read the speech. I have not seen the issue of Mambila Hydro. I don't know whether it's hidden somewhere, but I know it is a fundamental and a critical infrastructure for the survival of this country. So where, I don't know, I have not looked at it, because power is just 127 billion. If we are talking about Mambila, we will not talk about 127 billion. Maybe it's hidden somewhere, sir. Maybe we'll come to look at it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Into that district. Mr. President, I know that every year when budget is presented to the National Assembly, especially the Senate, there's the need for us to go through this process of having to have our debates on the budget as presented by Mr. President. First, let me say that for the first time, I'm going to deviate from a very early comment that I've made from year to year, that what Mr. President did this year is a complete deviation of what we have been saying in terms of procedure for the presentation of our annual budget estimates to the National Assembly, and of course the events too that will follow subsequently. For the first time, the provisions of our Fiscal Responsibility Act was strictly adhered to. You will remember or recall that last year we had the budget passed, or the budget presented to the National Assembly before the MTF and FSP came. Of course, we know the Act states very clearly that MTF and FSP must come, and of course the National Assembly must pass it, and all the benchmarks must be approved before the budget estimate comes. This is the time, first time I'm saying it, and we are adhering very strictly to this procedure. And I think it's commendable on the part of Mr. President and of course the leadership of the National Assembly. Mr. President, I want to go to very basic things about our budget, or what the budget is supposed to be for any society, for any country. Number one, budget estimate is an intention. Of course, it's composed of two components, the recurrent and the capital. The recurrent, as you know, even though it attracts even our budget over 70% this year, less than 17% is being made available for capital for MDAs in this year's budget. Then in which case, the greater majority of our people are going to get development in the area of provision of infrastructure, education, health facilities and other social amenities for people with less than 20% of our annual budget. But of course, we expect that with time this one should be reversed so that the greater majority of our people can benefit from our common patrimony. Mr. President, permit me to quickly go to some of the issues as raised by the leader in the lead debate that gave to the Senate 2 days ago. Number one, the areas that are very clear is the very low revenue to GDP ratio. This one again has been our bane. And I thank God that the standing committees that we have in the Senate are going to live up to this responsibility, because to bring this estimate, which of course is an intention, to reality, we must put our mouth where our money is. In which case, if we are not able to raise our revenue, all these discussions that we are having will amount to nullity, and God forbid, all the revenue-bearing agencies must be geared up. We must stand up and live up to our responsibility in terms of oversight to ensure that revenue is taken up. Number two, Mr. President, the issue that we have seen over the years is that this our capital expenditure, it has become a ritual. You can imagine that this year, for 2019, we have not been able to achieve anything in this regard. Mr. President just said before December, he expects that the 294 billion that has been released, we're going to have an additional 600 billion. As we speak, all the intentions, even our zonal intervention projects that will benefit the people in the hamlets in our different constituencies, we have not been executed. So I expect that capital expenditure we really need, to be operated this in the 2020 budget, so that our people can get the benefit of it. Then again, even when all these things are possible, Mr. President,
that we have revenue coming in. We have capital expenditure, of course, being executed the way it is. The provision in our act must strictly be adhered to, which is the budgetary execution and then, of course, the meeting of targets. That provision, if we go through it, that section 30 of Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is the responsibility of the finance minister to meet with the Fiscal Responsibility Commission and in the joint committee of finance of the Senate and the House of Reps, so that there is quarterly briefing on releases and distribution of funds. Because this one has been lacking. That is when, if there are mistakes in the execution of the budget,
you can start rounding up.
Colleagues.
District colleagues, my name is Senator Joaquin Elore. I represent Ondo Central. Mr. President, I'm pleased to make the following contribution towards the budget, proposed by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. President, yearly, it has been the ritual here that not much emphasis are laid on revenues of the government. We talk about the President's speech on under 31, so the sum of 8.155 trillion will be the estimated revenue for the government for 2020. Mr. President, I'm of the firm opinion that we have avenues where revenue of the government can even be tripled. But the question is that it appears those agencies where major revenue are to accrue to government have become so powerful that they are untouchable. And I want to advise that the next assembly should make a big difference. Number one, Mr. President, if you look at leakages of revenue from NNPC alone, if well accounted for, we even pay off all our deficit budget of 1.7 trillion. How much is it? This is what, if leakages in crude oil liftings in NNPC is blocked. 2, immigration. The internal revenue generation of immigration are not well accounted for. They are subcontracted to contractors who made away with federal government money with impunity of highest order. Mr. President, the relevant committees of the Senate should look at these areas and ensure that revenue accrued to government are well accounted for. What about stamp duty, Mr. President? Stamp duty revenue were never even accounted for up to 2019. In 2020 budget, the CBN governor just gave them, okay, go and put 200 billion there, where we believe that we can even raise not less than 3.5 to 4 trillion annually. Today, that revenue again is not accounted for. Nobody's talking about it. Number 4, the FRS. When you talk about increase in VAT, would there be any need? If there is effective collection of VAT, many state governments don't remit their VAT and withholding tax. Withholding tax is advanced payment of income tax. And government is the large spender. It's the largest spender. They have many contractors that they award billions of contracts. Withholding tax element is never remitted to federal revenue. I will urge the federal revenue to double their effort to do state government withholding that and VAT audit throughout the 37 states of the federation. Within the first quarter of next year, Mr. President, we will realize to pay off our budget, the deficit budget, to finance infrastructure decay in this country. Mr. President, again, that is the revenue aspect of the budget. We need to double effort. And all agencies of government that is charged with responsibility to generate revenue, they are quarterly reviewed, quarterly monitored, so that we have enough money to finance our budget. Mr. President, the expenditure aspect, 10.33 trillion. Well, budgets have been, sectorial allocation has been made, and if fairly distributed, there are certain critical infrastructure as it affects each state of the federation, And therefore, if it is well allocated by the executive, and then the appropriation committee also do justice, ensuring that revenue available are well allocated to various sectors of the economy, we believe that, Mr. President, many decayed infrastructure, like for instance, in my state, for instance, the federal road linking Akure to Ikere-Ekiti, that should normally take only 15 minutes drive. We normally take about 2 or 3 hours now. That is what promotes a lot of armed robbery attack on the road. Mr. President, again, we have the FUTA, School of Medical Sciences, that in 2014, 2.5 billion was released to that school, and later, because of certain things, the problems they faced, because of grant of CFO by the Delta government, the money was returned to the federal government.
Can start rounding off now.
Because dual exchange rate, when we do a budget on 305 naira to $1, and in actual fact, when we are talking about implementation, Nigerian importers who import raw material will be importing at the rate of 357. There's a 52% gap, and this has created a lot of infrastructural decay in the country, because at the rate of which they get foreign exchange is different from the rate we use to compute our budget. Mr. President, on that note, I want to advise that concerted efforts are made to double the revenue of the federal government. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So far today, I think 26 senators or 25 have made their contributions to the debate. The last speaker, being the final, will take, and I want to congratulate all those who have made their contributions. This is the second day of the allotted 3 days. So we'll adjourn, and the debate on the 2020 appropriation bill, general purpose, will continue on Tuesday next week. With these remarks, I will, of course, invite the Senate leader to move for adjournment. That is till Tuesday next week, when we'll continue with the debate.